Vegan Gains is stuck. So he and I had a debate 4, maybe 5 years ago now, where he tried to push this name the trait frame game on me, and I wasn't having it. Um, I had listened prior to my debate with him, had listened to Ask Yourself debating some, I forget the girl's name, the lady's name, but it was some black homesteader from the States. And she didn't quite get there, but and I forget what it was exactly, but something she said to Ask Yourself, I felt like she had him by the balls, and she was this close. I wish you could see my index finger and thumb right now. To hanging the guy, but didn't quite get there. And again, I forget what it was exactly, but it crystallized in my mind and gave me the idea. And she was like half a step away from turning entity, name the trait, on Ask Yourself, right? But didn't quite get there. And he's slick, so he distracted her and moved her away from the point, right? But that's basically the way to expose name the trait, right? It vegans propose Certain vegans propose this infallible, supposedly test of one's worldview's internal consistency or the lack thereof, more precisely, and yet they themselves fail the very name the trait test, right? Because the bullet that they have to bite more often than not is uh, killing and eating human beings, being okay with that, right? Non-sentient human beings, they do exist, right? And there's a whole other host of ways to expose name the trait. It's completely arbitrary. It's usually pushed by moral relativists who then try to moral fag, right? If you're a moral relativist, what the hell are you doing telling other people what's right or what's wrong, right? That's Well, if we're gonna go by um, the internal critique of anyone's worldview, well, you just failed. Why are you? You don't even have any solid ground to debate on, right? You don't believe morality exists, right? And I don't distinguish between what some people will call universal morality or morality. It's one and the same, right? If there is no standard by which we determine right or wrong, right? If right or wrong is just preference, then there is no right or wrong, right? Morality doesn't exist. Relative morality, it doesn't exist. Period. Right? If it's up to any individual to determine what's right or what's wrong, meaning they could change their mind anytime they feel like it, it doesn't exist. There is no morality, right? Truth doesn't exist. Everything is relative. If that's the worldview, right, which is ultimately what this comes down to, why are you, vegan gains, why are you moral fagging, right? It doesn't make any sense. Your worldview is internally inconsistent, right? Uh, there's a whole host of criticisms you can levy against these people. It just doesn't make any sense. And this was brought up in this debate with MadeByJimBob, right? Vegan Gains wants to talk about. Uh, he only believes in the physical. He'll say on the one hand, right? He's a what is it? A physicalist, materialist, right? He doesn't believe in. Or so he says anyway, right? In non-physical things. But then he talks about morals. He talks about beliefs, right? He he doesn't he rejects metaphysics, but then he uses metaphysical concepts all the time, right? His worldview is garbage. It's internally inconsistent. It's absolute trash. So it's quite the projection to try to criticize meat eaters' worldviews, right, as internally inconsistent, meaning, well, they shouldn't be eating meat, right? But if that were the case, right, they'd be more like you, who's completely and utterly internally, whose worldview is completely incoherent, internally inconsistent, right? That's one of the reasons, in my humble opinion, why you're so fucking depressed, kid, right? because you're a walking, talking contradiction, and your worldview has been exposed so many times in the last 5 years as complete trash, complete garbage. The entity is absolute fucking nonsense, and there you are still pushing this, right? It's a fucking grift, kid. You're depressed. One of the reasons why, obviously, it's look. I don't believe he's vegan. Okay, I think he eats bivalves. He basically alludes to it, right? And then he tries to pretend like, oh, I don't eat it because it's gross. No, he eats non-sentient, what he deems to be, right. It's completely arbitrary, subjective, because he gets to define what sentience is anyway, right? So he eats non-sentient animals. He's not vegan. He isn't. What he deems to be non-sentient animals, and he's perfectly fine with killing and eating, even though he wouldn't do it, right? Um, Non-sentient human beings, right? So dead people, um, kids born with some kind of brain disorder where they can't feel, or uh, they have no subjective experience, if you will, right? Or you can't prove that they do. Anyway, so, but in this debate with Jim Bob, but yeah, just to wrap up my previous point, one of the reasons why you're completely and utterly depressed, dude, why you're so low energy, low T, low everything, is because you've come to the realization, however, well, it has to be conscious, right? Because it's been pointed out to you many times already by people like myself also, that your worldview is garbage, right? You're living a lie. You're a fraud. And it's gotten to a point where I think it's safe to say that this is just a grift for you. Because having had name the trait exposed so many times by so many different people in a variety of ways as complete and utter garbage, for you to still push this nonsense as if it had any kind of validity to it, you really have to be lying to yourself. Meaning, you don't fucking respect yourself, right? And it shows. So anyway, in this debate with Made by Jim Bob, he was playing the same game, trying to anyway. Made by Jim Bob didn't. I understood what he was saying. Didn't allow him to do that. I think he could have been, if not a little bit more articulate, he could have pressed the point a little bit more. But I think Vegan Gains realized how full of shit he was and how Jim Bob exposed him, and he was just essentially threatening to rage quit, right? Let me take another sip of my coffee. And for the sake of the show and this particular show and the show in general, to have Vegan Gains come on and get his depressed self exposed, beat up on time and time again. The Crucible, one of the creators, I guess you would say, one of the mods, they just kind of placated to him and took it easy on the kid, right? Because they wanted him around and his audience. You know how it is. Anyway, so the game that he was trying to play on MJB, and again, I think Made by Jim Bob should have pressed the point. I think he should have. Uh, what's the saying? Kept the knee on his neck. Tighten that chokehold a little bit. But whatever, it was what it was. It was this frame game was this supposed critique of Made by Jim Bob's internal worldview, right? The inconsistency of his internal critique of his worldview, right? And if you can show that there's an inconsistency in the worldview, right? I.e., you eat meat, but you can't name the trait that makes animals consumable by humans. It's morally okay to consume animals, but you can't name what that trait is that makes it so for animals, but not human beings, right? Your worldview is internally inconsistent. You need to stop eating animals, and you need to have an internally inconsistent worldview, just as I do. My kind of right. This is absolute garbage. So what um, Vegan Games was trying to do is to create the same thing that Isaac, whatever his last name is, ask yourself, try to do it in a debate with me, right? He wanted to concoct this non-human human being, right? Which is fucking incoherent. The thing doesn't exist. It disqualifies you as an incoherent nincompoop. Poop. So uh, whereas Isaac was literally admitting to a non-human human being, right? Because my trait was human, and all these traits are more or less the same, or they allude to the same thing. The fact that we're human, right? However you define or ground that. Uh, because I said, well, the trait is human, right? Animals aren't human. We can eat them. Humans are humans. We don't eat them. Simple, like basic shit that a 5-year-old should be able to understand, right? But somehow these vegans don't get this shit, right? So Isaac creates this, non-human human being, right? Which is complete asinine nonsense. It doesn't exist. And then he says, would you eat that, right? Well, it doesn't. What? The thing doesn't exist. What are you talking? It's absurd. It's nonsense, right? So that's why they create these. Uh, they call them hypotheticals, but they're not even hypotheticals because a hypothetical has to be, well, possible, right? It has to be coherent. It has to make sense, if only theoretically or hypothetically, right? In theory, right? So vegan gains is because Jim Bob's trait was made in the image of God, right? Human beings are made in the image of God. That's why we don't eat them, right? We give them moral consideration, if you will. You might as well just said they're human. It's essentially the same thing, right? I get it. It's not, but it is, for the sake of this critique here. So then vegan gains, right? In an attempt to criticize Jim Bob's the inconsistency of his internal worldview, created a non-human human being, except in this case, he sprinkled quite a bit of emotional appeal there, right? By evil, evil Hitler, poor Jews, therefore veganism, right? That's I guess the subplot to his argument, you could say. He said, well, what if there were these people, right? This is the impossible hypothetical. These Jews that weren't made in the image of God, right? So essentially what he said was, what if you had this non-human human being, right? Because all humans are created in the image of God. Jews are humans, therefore, right? We don't eat Jews because they're human. They're created in the image of God. So then Vegan Gains just said, what if we had these non-human human beings or Jews that weren't created in the image of God, right? You'd have to bite the bullet on saying that it's okay to murder and eat them. So what's the problem with that, right? Well, if he's doing an internal critique of Jim Bob's worldview, right? The real world in which Jews are human beings created in the image of God, right? He cannot just change the world, imagine a different type of world, an impossible world, and use that, right, to criticize, because he's no longer criticizing Jim Bob's worldview, right? Because his worldview is based on the real world, not some imagined fucking incoherent nonsense. Thus, it's not a critique of Jim Bob's worldview. It's not an internal critique of his worldview because his worldview is based on the real world in which we all exist and not some fucking la la land that Vegan Gains wants to impose on him, right? So, once again, the quote unquote arguments that vegans have, right, is grant me all of my nonsensical presuppositions, grant me all of my incoherence, right? Uh, And by that token, you yourself become incoherent. Step into my asinine, insane, absurd, incoherent worldview. Assume this nonsensical worldview so that I could point out, basically project how nonsensical the shit is, right? But because I'll be the first one to point it out and levy the criticism against you in hopes of stumping you with the nonsense, right? Because you're a logical human being who thinks about this shit and you actually try to make sense, right? Once I bombard you with this absolute fucking nonsense and I talk over you, don't let you speak and keep asking you the same question over and over and over in order to shut you up, so you don't try to, right? I have to trick you to stop thinking and I can't allow you to answer because I have to be the first one to point out how once I drag you into my miserable, self-refuting, nonsensical, absurd worldview, right? Then I get to project onto you how fucking stupid that shit is, and hopefully nobody catches on, right? And this is why you're fucking depressed, kid. Because you live in a lie, and all you do is project that nonsense onto other people. But because they're not willing to join you in your fucking misery, right? They just fucking clown you and point out how fucking miserable and useless you are, kid. Seriously, like, I'm not gonna say that I say that with love, especially since it doesn't fucking sound like that anyway. But in a way, it is tough love. You know what I mean, dude? Shape the fuck up, fess up. We all know, well, it is my opinion that you do eat non-sentient animals, right? Because if you didn't, you wouldn't be this fucking fat. You'd be starved and absolutely, completely deteriorated, like most of your comrades in your little fucking commie cult over there. Um, but basically, vegan gains the way out of this, right? As and this is the way out of, well, the darkness, if you will, and the bullshit and the problems that plague humanity. Period. Is to actually, right? Speak the truth. Just speak the truth. Because if you do, you'll realize that you're not saving any animals, so you might as well eat them, right? You'll feed your brain and body the necessary nutrients for it to not be fucking depressed, for you to shape up physically, right? Look like a healthy human being. And I'm not saying it's going to solve all your problems, but if you stay on the path to truth and you embrace truth, trust me, your life will be a lot better. And you won't need all these partners in misery in order to look at the world and say, oh, see, there's there's other people that are worse off than me even. So maybe it's not all hopeless yet. Maybe I don't have to off myself just yet because there are others who are even worse off than myself, right? Anyway, name the trait is absolute fucking nonsense. It has been exposed time and time and time again in a variety of ways over the course of the last 5 years, at least here in YouTube anyway. I don't know about elsewhere. And it doesn't take a philosophical genius or highly educated individual to point how ridiculous this shit is on many different levels. And the simple fact that you haven't been able to embrace this truth, right, is one of the ways why you're a miserable human being, right? So kudos to JimBob. He did great. I thought he could have done better by pressing his advantage more, but that would be, kicking a man while he's down. So I kind of understand why they did what they did. Um, but it's just, it's just so dishonest. It's just so slimy, and, and it's just so fucking pathetic. How you motherfuckers will just lie through your fucking teeth time and time and time again, beating the dead horse that is the name, the trait, just so you could have you know, enough ducats to buy some of this garbage that you consume on the daily. It's a fucking grift, man, and it's a pathetic one. That's all I gotta say. Thanks for watching.